it seems like on foreign policy, yes, there's no plan from progressives. There's like abstention votes or voting no on extra money for Ukrainian weapons. Someone like Ilhan Omar who gets hammered when all she's saying is like, I just kind of want it accounted for. I don't think it should be an endless fund. I am worried about the money. That seems like a dead end on Ukraine, but there are some openings on, let's say, stopping funding to Saudi Arabia, right, for its war on Yemen, and the ways that even some Republicans can be picked off to support bills like that. How do you see foreign policy strategy maneuvering for progressives in Congress?
I think the progressives in Congress have an almost impossible job right now. My own evaluation of how they're doing is probably a little more positive than yours, given the constraints that they face. So they are working around trying to end the war in Yemen. The progressives are doing certain things even around Palestine, which has been a third rail in American politics for decades and decades. There is opposition to the new Cold War policies against China. So they are trying to work those things. I think their calculations have to do with what they think they can win. They pick their fights, and they pick the fights about where they think they can make a difference. And they also have to deal, as you pointed out, with the realities in their own districts and what's going to keep them in power. Now, this is just a reality that you face if you're elected official. We don't, the grassroots folks, there's a creative tension that has to exist between our grassroots movements and the elected officials. We're not going to just fall in line behind everything they do. We do have to push. That's the advantage of being on the outside. You're not accountable for the results. You can push the values, and we can push our demands, and that's our job, to push the envelope.
So that feeling we have is a good feeling. That friction you're saying is a good friction.
It's a fact of life until you have a situation where there is a coherent left force in a parliamentary system where you can have a disciplined party vote, and where you can hold your electoral people accountable, and you can do so because you know you can deliver the goods if they take a risky stance. Right. The left's attitude, you can't, you can hold people accountable. And what does that actually mean if you can't turn out the votes in the district? Right. If you don't have an operation where you consult with people and then you say, okay, if you don't vote our way, we're going to primary you and you're going to lose, right, or we're going to support you. If you can't deliver, it's just hot air. It's money talks.
Or it's even worse than that, Max. I think it's even worse. I think it goes nihilistic, and it can even go, in the other direction where you're like, well, then I'm going to throw down with the Republican in this two-party system. And you're like, well, that's fucking dumb. That's the worst take yet,
You've got Tulsi Gabbard, if you want to talk about that kind of a direction. There's plenty of people who have gone that direction, which is, the hatred for the establishment, which, of course, we all believe is understandable and justified, ends up turning into a right-wing demagogic kind of position. That we've seen plenty of people go that route over many, many decades. Right. Tulsi Gabbard is only one of the latest. But the point being that for the time being, for the immediate next future of American politics, there's going to be a creative tension between the grassroots movements and the elected officials who, like you said, turn themselves progressive. And you were even mentioned one of the high points of that, the sit-in at Pelosi's office by sunrise, and which AOC participated in. That was a big thing, and that was a great example of that kind of creative attention, because it did catapult the Green New Deal into the mainstream, and it moved the Democratic Party. Even though the sit-in was at Pelosi's office, the main target was the climate change denialists in the Republican Party. Right. But they managed to pull that off. And that was an extremely creative action. And it took place at a certain time and at a certain moment. Now, we have to look for those kinds of opportunities today. Sometimes they don't come along all the time. There's a bunch of things that come together. You look at my generation, those sit-ins in Woolworths in 1960 that went like wildfire against segregation, and Bill Snick, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. People tried to do the same thing in the late 1940s. There was Freedom Riders across the South in 47, 48, 49. It didn't work. It didn't catch fire then, because that was the beginning of the Cold War. McCarthyism was on the rise. The United States was cracking down on communism all over the world. By 1960, the United States was fighting for our hearts and minds in Asia, Africa, Latin America. And explicit segregation didn't look the same as it did in 1948 to the powers that be. So there was a lot more leverage. And the moral case against segregation and Jim Crow was just as strong in 1876, 1890, 1948, or 1960. But it's politics and the balance of forces and so on that meant that breakthrough came in the 1960s. And then you get the 1964 Civil Rights Act and then the 1965 Voting Rights Act.
Do you
think we're living through, one way to look at the Trump era is what we're living through is the most intense phase of the 60-year backlash that's been the main driver of U.S. politics since 1965, 68, 69, into the 70s, has been the backlash against the gains of the 1960s. The end of Jim Crow, end of racist immigration quotas, modern women's movement, LGBTQ movement, anti-Vietnam War movement. All of that comes out of the 1960s, and there's been one stage after another of the backlash against that, from Nixon's Southern strategy through Reagan and neoliberalism and through birtherism, and now we're facing MAGA, which has all those things in its gun sights.
What's amazing to me about that analysis, and sorry, Gareth, is that it feels like no Democrat lays it out like that. Hey, we've just been in backlash this whole time, because it feels like they've been participating in the backlash, and they have been paving the road for the backlash, capitulating to the backlash. So even the backlash wants a back scratch. Like, it's all about just like making the backlash not feel like exactly what it is, which is what you're saying, that generational backlash to all of the gains. Here we are in the last gasp. It's like, it feels like, the villain, the hand comes out of the mud. He's still alive. He's crazier than ever. He's got like one eye, Q is God, like whatever. And we've got it. This is just a shoe and we're hitting it. But Gareth, I want to give you a chance to jump in.
I just worry that, that we're unable to, in my lifetime, Occupy Wall Street was really felt like the culmination of actually there was a real movement. It felt like something was going to change. And Obama felt very much like the candidate who was going to kind of bring in that change through the system, through the two-party system.
Right.
It was the last time that I really felt like political hope, and the disappointment of that time and of that presidency in a lot of ways is what has kind of turned me to this place where I feel like a lot of it is more performative than anything. And I think you're right that there's a lot of infighting, which is, it has to do with the system kind of failing voters over and over again. But I feel like they are so good now at allowing performance over action in a system where there's like a media that just does total avoidance on issues that actually matter. That I worry, so true. I don't know where this next moment comes from. I feel like people really are so bought into the two-party system, the way it's kind of constructed, and I know what you're saying. Like, there are like little victories that go on here and there, but I think when you look at like what the Green New Deal was like saying there's no time for this shit. Yeah. And I just don't know how much more, when you see Joe Manchin having the ear of Biden as much as Bernie Sanders or more, that's where I go. I don't know if we have a breaking point, and even if we do have it, I don't know if we have people on the inside who are going to listen and help.
Yeah. Well, look, let's face it, we're in a lot of trouble.
Yeah. It's very true.
We're in a lot of trouble. And we're in a lot of trouble because we squandered. We did our best during the period from the late 90s, from the early 90s into the present. People built protest movements. People did a lot of good work against the globalization, the Seattle demonstrations, against the Iraq War. But the left didn't try to build a political machine to contend for power, including in the electoral arena. And meanwhile, the right wing was doing what it was doing, laying the groundwork for exactly where they've gotten in terms of the whole way that the Republican Party has been transformed into essentially a fascist party. That didn't happen overnight. That happened over 20 years of since Newt Gingrich and all the stuff in the 90s, one wave after another. And of course, the mainstream Democrats, like you said, they were complicit. But we have to understand some of the reasons they were complicit. One reason they were complicit, they had a better sense of the danger from the right than we did. I think a lot of the left was ignoring what was going on in the Republican Party for the last 20 years. And that was a mistake. So that doesn't mean we share the values of those Democrats, but we have to understand some of the reasons they behaved the way they did. It's not that they're total idiots or that they are all just waiting to pounce on the left. They're bought and paid for by certain interests, and their main interest is to win elections.
Yes.
So we have to build up enough strength to be able to make that difference. Occupy, there's a direct Occupy to the more progressive parts, to Bernie's campaign and the more progressive parts of Biden's program.
Yes.
Occupy did that. It took 10 years.
But it also,
that's what happens. It takes time for that to happen.
But it also, again, was also kind of not extinguished, but it was manipulated again. And it again, I mean, the difference being this point in history is that there's not enough time to fuck around with that stuff. Like Bernie, again, was totally a moment where it was like, holy shit. I mean, one of my favorite moments was watching people on MSNBC melt down when it looked like Bernie was going to beat Biden for the nomination. It was remarkable, and yet again, it was another moment that sort of they were able to kind of siphon it in a direction where it was.
It's a long walk. It's a long walk to freedom. Okay, Gareth, to quote
But we're
Mandela.
like Wile E. Coyote walking on the air over the cliff now. And we don't
have no more cliff. It's true. And I do want to say, though, that going to your book, Max, and this compilation written by grassroots organizers about strategies surrounding the 2020 election, in the intro, it's very moving because I think you name the ways that coming in the 90s and early 2000s, when you're talking about the lack of building a actual power apparatus and a structure, there was a rejection of electoral politics largely. Like, they're not looking out for us. We have to look out for ourselves. We don't want anything to do with that two-party corrupt system. And then you have this line in this intro which says the unacceptable cost of abstentionism, evidenced by the Trump administration. It is unacceptable to relinquish the electoral arena. And instead, how can we turn these low propensity voters, as you all write, into high propensity and high potential voters that come out every single electoral cycle that are a force to be reckoned with? So maybe talk about how electoralism has become so much more relevant and how the grassroots organizations and the leaders that you had write chapters of this book, like, how are they doing it different? How is it not the sort of play-by-play, run-of-the-mill DCCC stuff?
Well, one of the one of the aspects of having a systemic critique of capitalism and the way the political system is to recognize that the people who are embedded in it and who've grown up into it and have played by those rules, we expect every goddamn thing that they do. We know they're going to manipulate. We know that be performative. That's part of the game. That's their politics. So I'm past being angry about it. It's just like the air we breathe.
Yeah.
There's no, there's that slogan that people said, we are the ones we've been waiting for. There isn't anybody that's going to come along to save the constituencies we care about that doesn't come out of a different kind of politics than what's basically how you function in today's American politics. We have to build up our movements to the point where we have to play on that terrain. We can't storm the Winter Palace from the outside. That's not going to work in a country like the United States, where the majority does politics through elections.
It nearly did for the right, though, which I believe it was Michael Moore recently pointed out. Like, he was like, y'all, we know we were jealous, right? Everyone on the left was a little jelly of like how far the Capitol rioters got.
If only they were doing it over rational, over
No
things
shit.
that mattered. Instead, they were like, they took our president. It was like, do it for healthcare, you idiot.
Absolutely. And it's not strictly an electoral thing. We should go back and look at the way the right conquered power. If you go back to look at Bush versus Gore, the Brooks Brothers riot outside of the Broward County where the vote counting took place.
Yep.
This was not strictly an electoralist, legalist strategy on the right-wing side. They did plenty of grassroots mass action of their kind. And
but
they
always funded by billionaires, Mac. This is my thing. We don't have the billionaires.
They went where the counterpart to the left, which tries to rebuild the labor movement, tenants unions, and all kinds of other popular organizations, the right wing went after the white evangelical churches starting in the 1970s and turned them into a politicized mass organization of the right. So we have to build that kind of political power.
We should do that with Scientologists. That should be
we have to build that kind of political power. And as we build that political power, we have to keep our arms open, because there are people from within the system who are going to turn to the left. That's always happened too. If you go back to look at before the Civil War, at a certain point, it's not only the abolitionists and the left who won that war. They built enough political power and moral high ground that a bunch of people came over to their side. That's what radical republicanism was all about, which produced the biggest change, the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment, which we're still standing on today, which are hovering on the edge of extinction in today's Supreme Court. But that was the closest we came in this country to some kind of revolutionary change, was the end of slavery and Reconstruction. So we have to keep our arms open and recognize that there are going to be people within the system who they were within the system. And when something better looks like it's coming along, we'll welcome them into it. But
they want to be on the right side when we're winning. Everyone wants to be on the right side when we're winning.
Exactly. But we have to build that up. And that's what
we have to win.
That book was about, those formations that are trying to build. They have a power building strategy. They try to integrate electoral work with year-round campaigning, with the idea over time they're going to have their own people be elected for office who actually come out of their movements and who are connected to them. Lucha in Arizona is one of the chapters, formed after 2010 when Arizona was in the center of anti-immigrant work, the anti-immigrant movement in this country. By young Latinos, and over time, through a whole series of campaigns, including getting rid of Joe Arpaio at Maricopa County, the racist sheriff like that, they built up power. Now, they flipped Arizona, turned it into purple, elected some Democrats, but in this last round, they also elected 10 or 15 of their own people to various offices within the state. and Arizona was a key battleground. And it's a big thing that they defeated those two election denialists who were running for Secretary of State Fincham and, our Kerry Lake, who's the main, was being touted as the best heir to Trump. She's got a lot more charisma than Ron DeSantis. If she had won the governorship in Arizona, we'd be in a different political landscape right now.
Right.
So,
I mean, I think that
she did win. We got to count the votes first, Max. Let's get all the votes counted.
I mean, that I think is huge. Seeing the way, and I hope media and mainstream Democrats, instead of capitulating, well, I guess people just want fascism, seeing the way 2022 and the midterms bore out that no, they don't. They don't. Even yes, swing suburban voters who I know that your book and the left should not be focused on, but it's like, yeah, no, even those guys, even the people who are usually catered to by the DCCC and Democrats, they don't want that. They're gettable. And so anyway, I wish that the Democrats would sort of like plant their flag on this victory-ish of the 2022 midterms and grow and build on it and do more. What's going on, Frantifa? If you haven't already, subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that button. And also, you can become a patron and support the show every single week. Get access to bonus episodes and exclusive merchandise. Patreon.com/bitchuation room. Do it.